Good afternoon, everyone. I am Reverend Dr. Stacy Edwards Dunn, and I serve as the director for the Center for African American Ministry and Black Church Studies at McCormick Theological Seminary. And it's on behalf of McCormick as well as the center that we say welcome to the 2021 National Women's History Month lecture at McCormick. Today, I am pleased to introduce to you no other than the Reverend Dr. Alison P. Gise Johnson, who will serve as our lecturer today. Dr. Gise Johnson is the Associate Professor of Historical and Theological Studies, as well as the Director of the Doctor of Ministry program at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology of Virginia Union University in Richmond, Virginia. Her research centers on marrying theological ethics, public health, as well as social enterprise with specific interest in developing livable, sustainable communities and value-centered leadership. As a womanist scholar and an activist, she served as KDG Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership Design as a team member for them, Vice President of Programs and Resources at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference Incorporated, and is currently serving as a co-pastor of the Faith Community Baptist Church and co-founder of Arcs and Altars, and a community of women who are collaborating to create spaces for dreaming, strategizing, and building and becoming. I was blessed to have Dr. Johnson as one of my professors at Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology. I am certainly the better because of her teaching, her scholarship, and just because of who she is. And I am so excited that she is our lecturer today, as I already know that she is going to bless us in a mighty way with her lecture, Redeeming the Kiss, a womanist perspective of the relationship between justice and righteousness. Dr. Gise Johnson, we say welcome to you. We are so excited. I am so excited to have you today. And we just ask God's blessings upon you as you come today with your lecture. God bless you and enjoy, McCormick family and friends.
Greetings. It is my pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you this evening during the annual Herstory lecture presented by the Center for African American Ministry and Black Church Studies at McCormick Seminary. I want to offer special thanks to Dr. Stacy Edwards Dunn, who was one of my first students at the Proctor School of Theology, and the way that she and her colleagues came to their work with fire and insight and giftedness. They made me know that I was in the right place as an academic. Um, they inspired me, and her work still inspires me. So thank you, Dr. Stacy, to the faculty, my beloved colleagues, Dr. Stephanie Crumpton and David Daniels, Reggie Williams, Reginald Wade Williams, Leslie Callahan, Ozzie Smith, Otis Moss, and Dolores Brown Daniels. You all got like a real posse. I'm grateful for the work you do. And to the whole community, thank you. When God invited me away from Richmond, I think it was in 2007, to come back to my hometown of Chicago, McCormick Library served as my sanctuary. During my wilderness journey, stripped of titles and real paid professional theological assignments, working outside of the academy, I was blessed to be able to come to this place where God conceived the collaborative work that my best friend and I, Vanessa Monroe, who is an alum of your institution, God conceived within us the unearthing of the lives of the women in the book of Exodus. And after about 10 years, Vanessa and I, finally brought forth Exodus Women Volume 1, Securing the Sacred. This collection of works to us makes it apparent that the let us God of the Hebrew people loves collaboration. Some of our published and soon to be published work informs my insights today as I share this evening's lecture, Redeeming the Kiss, a womanist reading of the relationship between justice and righteousness. I come to this work as an ethicist committed to applied womanism. An applied womanism expansive enough to embrace and invest in the full humanity of Black women and girls that have the audacity to dream and love and create community in spaces that sometimes are constructed to be inhospitable to life, to us, and viewed as void of God's power, presence, and protection. Whether sisters dependent on government assistance, corporate execs, hourly wage workers, or clergy, we tend to all share a common journey of trying to make sense of unarticulated well springs of dreams and creativity, whose wanting, pushing desire to be born keeps us up at night while praying for enough rest and strength to face the onslaught of accusations related to presumed incompetence and brutal punishment for simply making people feel uncomfortable with our unexplainable, expansive giftedness. Our experiences are neither exclusive nor rare, but our reactions expand beyond the typical responses to trauma, to fight, to flee, to freeze. In my experience, for better or for worse, Black women experience to a larger degree a fourth response, which is to fix. I come to this work as one who grew up on the south side of Chicago watching women in leadership wielding power to create. And when imbalance occurred in that which was created, they fixed it. Not as anomaly, but as norm, these women led extraordinarily because they knew the power of both justice and righteousness. They knew that the two were required to kiss, not because of over sexualized imaginations, but because Black women, according to psychologists, are viewed as the most social beings on earth. And requisite to being social is an unapologetic power to love and convene kissing. Whether in corporate spaces, on front porches, religious or educational institutions, or on political platforms, Black women know how to convene kisses. Growing up, I watched and often practiced and mimicked these women who kissed wounds and the wounded, who kissed as invitation to hospitality, who kissed in recognition of shared spirituality, who institutionalized kissing as pedagogy. For this lecture entitled Redeeming the Kiss, a womanist reading of the relationship between righteousness and justice, I define the kiss as a theoethical engagement of two seemingly independent bodies that overcome constructed competitive otherness to create possibilities for a sustained future grounded in an ethic of a restorative kiss reflective of the active let us God, imaged as both male and female, and whose likeness constitutes a radical collaboration committed to bringing life sustaining order out of chaos. This restorative kiss erupts in a by any means necessary innovative approach to fixing imbalances that periodically occur when fear of insufficiency governs development and distribution of resources through institutionalized objectification of peoples and exploitation of nature. Ultimately, de emphasizing temporal embodiment of the loving kindness of God. In other words, insecure leadership in every facet of life and governance through institutionalization of fear, manipulate and commodify the image and likeness of God in order to have unmitigated access to and control over land, labor, and relationships, ultimately committing what womanist scholar Dolores Williams has termed as the sin of defilement, the original sin, which equates the use of creation in ways never intended, leading to pervasive, endemic, economic, and spiritual poverty, which is an affront to the God of provisions and the source of normalized morning by morning and day by day trauma to the whole of creation, the creation that God loves. In response, the collaborative Let Us God, by any means necessary, instigates a kiss between justice and righteousness that necessarily replaces object driven leadership with a relationship centered movement that defunds unsustainable debt based economies and restores what Chad Myers terms as divine economies of grace that institutionalize politically and socially the reign of God through just distribution of resources. In my reading, that is the nature of the story of the Hebrews who are invited to the wilderness, where embodied worship of ancestral gods reveals celebration of equitable distribution of resources and restoration of relationships as central to what it means to be and become one people. This idea of economics ensuring the restorative power of relationships as evidence of divine intervention is the essence of the reading of Jesus's ministry in Mark as interpreted by Chad Myers and the um, theological perspective of Dolores Williams. In both of these readings, the we God reveals to and through a woman one who will usher people away from an oppressive political economy as means of ushering in a divine commonwealth. And fundamental to the reign of God is, according to Dolores Williams, understanding that the ministry of Jesus is related to the restoration of relationships between God and humankind, amongst humans themselves, and between humans and nature. In other words, righteousness is always connected to resources, not merely a function of obedience to codes of rightness. In a cognitive map generated by Dr. Katie G. Cannon, central to the march of Christian imperialism that usurps faith and replaces it with religion that creates slaves, a religion that justifies conquering territories or gentrifying neighborhoods, a religion that exploits natural and human resources in the service of divine providence. Central to this theoethical trajectory of global imperialism is an ethical system of behaviors, rights, duties, codes, and liberties regulated and continually policed by those who embrace verifiable measures of superiority. And we equate all of that with a rhetorical righteousness. In the ministry of Jesus, and what was to be the creation of the church as a fix to religious imperialism was the restoration of relationships through baptism that destroys constructed identities of race, class, ethnicity, sex, such that the politics of identity can no longer be used as commodities to be bought, sold, and leveraged for more exploitative power and used as catalysts for the de escalation of compassion. the church and its ministries were to embody a complete commitment to relationship based righteousness and justice as systemic, equitable distribution of resources, which is the only means of sustaining life and being peoples of faith. Interpreted by Raphael Warnock through the Galatians 3:28 text, at the core, the function of a radical baptism joins righteousness and justice. In Christ, there is no Jew, nor Greek, no male, nor female, no slave, nor free, is a renunciation of participation in hierarchical social systems of caste, where value determines distribution of resources. As one who is interested in applied womanism, I say all of this to suggest that it seems that as a country, we are in a season for redeeming kisses. We have been in this place before where there was legislated or socially instigated opportunity to reconvene justice and righteousness as foundations for institutionalizing the loving kindness of God as expressed in the inextricable connection between relationships and resources. Yet, my caution to us as people of faith is that we do not miss this moment by settling for inclusion in an unsustainable world system disguised as democracy. Let us be clear. During the election season and after the election, there have been conversations related to redeeming the soul of America. And this work will continue to go on until the ideas of the Declaration of Independence may be institutionalized through a complete revisioning of the founding documents of this country. Until that is done, we will performatively experience seasons of hope and progress and change, where there are discussions about equity and justice and reparations, and perhaps even some legislation offered and passed. There will be another iteration of the talented 10th invited into the core of corporate and intellectual spaces while the masses still struggle. There will be study after study conducted on disparities and inequities, and Black businesses and faith organizations will be competing for funding wherein the lion's share of the resources has already been allocated to businesses and academic institutions more established and trusted to do the work. At the end of the season, not much will have changed because the solutions generated do not align with the fundamental problem. And that is that this country has been grafted into a pre existing global political economy that has institutionalized what Resma Menakem terms white bodied trauma, grounded in the historical reality that in the 1500s and 1600s in England, people were routinely burned at the stake for heresy, tortured relentlessly as official instrument of the English government. Science was employed to engineer devices of torture, including the rack, which was used to stretch human bodies and pull them apart. The tortures and punishments of civil justice customarily cut off hands and ears and burned and flayed and dismembered bodies. In everyday life, passersby saw some criminal flogged with a knotted rope or chained upright in an iron collar. They passed corpses hanging and decapitated heads and quartered bodies impaled on stakes on the city walls. Those who colonized the Americas fled torture and plagues that raged through much of their country, killing an estimated 100,000 people in 1 year, ravaging food systems, dislocating peoples, and those who identify with the colonizers internalize a shared cultural trauma, morally tutored through religious practices and legislated social proximity. In other words, this white body trauma is amplified over generations. This white body trauma through institutionalization becomes white body supremacy that calls itself democracy. It is sustained through unmitigated access and control of land, labor, and relationships. It is hidden under the enduring cloak of racism, inducing anger in some and pity in others. And it disguises violent tendencies through the rhetoric of nationalism and national security. Almost 8 months after Black trauma caused by police murdering unarmed citizens became catalysts for global protest, after almost a whole year of strange reactions related to COVID 19 infections, on January infections and deaths. On January 6th, in the nation's capital, with the certification of votes cast in hopes of change, a political movement strategically interested in participating in a redeeming kiss was met with eruptions of ancestral white body trauma, complete with erected gallows and frenzied deep hunger to punish offenders. Legislators, many in white bodies themselves, had no idea that the equitable, integritous counting of votes was an affront to institutionalized white body supremacy, protected by the Constitution and ordained by what Kelly Brown Douglas points to as the stand your ground God. Prior to that moment, many white Republican lawmakers over the course of the Trump era were simply employing racism as a commodity to be bought, sold, and leveraged for more power, having no idea that the ancestral spirits they unleashed were and still are inconsolable. And their trauma goes unresolved. What is pivotal to those of us who are seminarians, scholars, pastors, healers, Christians, and peoples practicing the faith of Jesus of Nazareth is that during the 1500s, during the same century during which white on white body torture was being normalized across Europe and shape shifting to create black body trauma globally, German priest Martin Luther was hard at work forging a trauma informed Protestant theology that would give rise to a trauma informed religion and give birth to a trauma addicted nation. For those of us that remember our church history, Luther argued for a theological perspective wherein the Bible was to be the only source of divine revelation, suggesting that nature nor any other sacred text or indigenous based mythos could reveal God's truth. As part of this work, he created a truncated canon, reducing the sources from which to hear revelation by decanonizing books that in great detail described and celebrated the she dimension of the collaborative Godhead known as wisdom. Luther's canonization, centralizing the redacted, westernized Christian Bible as the only source for God's revealed truth, and his trauma informed biblical interpretation, blinded to a relational hermeneutic of collaboration, slowly then and now seduces the human heart away from its natural hunger and affinity for relationship. It reduces communal economic sovereignty to charity. It makes poverty self induced and punishable by law. And it silences the feminine dimension of the let us Godhead, whose function as spirit is to make the heart and mind despise oppression, to reveal innovative ways forward and thus redeem the relationship between righteousness and justice that demands that faith inspired protest be more than an exercise in rhetoric. I would like to posit for discussion and divine action, redeeming the kiss as a challenge to the white church and the black church, in order that we may know the requirements and power of collaboratively becoming the church. Though the work has to deal with issues of race, I believe that the first step in this work is done in separate space. Because the sources of our trauma are different, the work we must do cannot be done under the umbrella of racial reconciliation, because the presupposition of white body trauma informed race nomenclature is that whiteness is a race of humans and blackness is a sub or lesser race. Therefore, for those who are interested in a path forward, for those that see themselves as white congregations, individuals, and communities interested in redeeming the kiss, I would suggest, as Menachem also offers in My Grandmother's Hands, that people of European descent must do their own work in their own space in order to usher in opportunities for healing, healing white body trauma without leaning on the rhetoric of white guilt or white supremacy or how to become anti racist. This work is about learning to address current and enduring ancestral wounds related to white on white body trauma. In other words, the healing work needs to happen by those engaged and those who identify phenotypically or culturally through systems of value centering on objects. That group of people is invited to convene themselves to redeem the kiss, trusting that spirit will reawaken the heart to despise violence and oppression and will reveal innovative, life sustaining ways forward. Now, for Black people and the Black church, the mere desire to engage in a restorative ethic of collaboration has become the source of Black body trauma historically and even now. Whether forced baptism or charitable, superficial inclusion, the desire to redeem the relationship between justice and righteousness in the antebellum world was punishable by death, as archived in the work and life of Reverend Nat Turner, Gabriel Prosser, and countless others in the South. The courage to kiss was destroyed or at least discouraged legislatively and militarily, as experienced in redlining and government ordained gentrification and improvements to infrastructure and all out military and paramilitary attacks on Black Wall Streets and Black held lands and Black bodies nationally. For many, in order to be included in the global economy, some Black churches have been seduced theologically, and some Black people have been seduced socially through adherence to trauma informed theologies that operate through religious and academic institutions at the intersection of sexualized racism and respectability informed kindness that has exacerbated the damage of white initiated trauma as it morphs into Black on Black body trauma. And there becomes an enduring division that makes Black people, communities, and churches vulnerable to systemic institutionalized trauma that requires and even mandates internal and external over policing, mandates reliance on a never realized enduring hope in the largesse of an economic system based on exploitation, criminalization, caste, chaos, and commodification of Black bodies. What is apparent in a theoethical global analysis is neither righteousness only nor justice focused ministries have shifted the dial and caused broad transformation for the lives of Black and Brown people. Neither Bible based righteousness nor social justice rhetoric have created an infrastructure that nurtures relationships nor secures resources for us. Therefore, as part of our faith journey, we must carve out spaces to address Black body trauma, period. Refusing to engage in the rhetoric of forgiveness, perhaps even refusing to engage in the rhetoric of resilience, refusing to engage in the rhetoric of reconciliation, or even to be seduced into the doing of the work that only others can do themselves. In other words, those that operate in and walk through this life as Black bodies are invited to unapologetically come to Black spaces, focused on mending our hearts and minds through addressing our trauma and trusting that Spirit will reawaken our hearts to despise violence and oppression, that she will reveal innovative life sustaining ways forward, and the Let Us God, committed to collaboration through redeeming the kiss, will legislate and socially instigate opportunity to reconvene justice and righteousness as foundations for the loving kindness of God as expressed in the inextricable connection between relationships and resources. Let us consider the possibility of redeeming the kiss. Thank you and good evening.
What a powerful lecture we just heard from Dr. Alison Gise Johnson. Dr. Johnson, we just want to say thank you for that amazing way that you just poured into us, for all of that brilliance that we just experienced. We say thank you. Thank you, thank you for sharing with us on today. And we just ask God's blessings upon you, upon your family, upon your ministry, and upon your continued work and scholarship, that God will just bless you 10,000 fold for the amazing way that you poured into us on today. And McCormick family and community, on March the 23rd, you will have the opportunity to engage with Dr. Alison Gise Johnson in a live Zoom Q&A. So after this particular lecture today, we ask that you would get the registration link and get yourself registered so that you might be able to ask some questions regarding this powerful and brilliant lecture we just experienced as a result of Dr. Alison Gise Johnson. Again, thank you so much for being with us on today. And we say, may the Lord bless you and may the Lord keep you. Make God's face shine upon you and be gracious unto each one of you until we meet again. Go in peace. Have a wonderful day and get yourself registered for our live Zoom Q&A with Dr. Alison Gise Johnson for this Women's History Month. God bless you. Have a great day.